This morning, we're going to do something unusual. All of you work in firms, typically, or in offices. And an architectural office is very different from an association. And we're here at an association. You're members of an association, and we're changing the association in many ways with repositioning. The focus of this morning's conversation is going to be about associations. In fact, if you are board members or officers in your own home chapters, you might think that an association ought to be run like your offices run. But believe me, they're very different things. Do associations need to change? Do they even have a future? Does AIA have a future? The question's not an idle one. The practice is changing in architecture, and the change is accelerating. How does that affect you? How does that affect me? What do we, as the AIA, have to look like for the future, not just to accommodate, but to make real change happen and to enable it? We've brought together a couple of people for you to address the challenge of change. Help us see the possibilities so that we can become an organization that is not reactive, but proactive. So we don't face issues like deer in the headlights after they've already occurred, but we're looking forward. We want to be a catalyst for change, and we've invited two experts to be with us this morning here on the stage. The first is Seth Kahan, the author of the bestseller, Getting Change Right, and another, Getting Innovation Right. He's the founder of a site called transformation.com. And John Graham IV, who is the president and CEO of the American Society of Association Executives. If anybody knows about associations, it's John. So John and Seth are going to take their places on stage here. Gentlemen, please come on out. And as they're coming, I'd like to pose a question for us. Come on out. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to see you. Glad to have you. Seth, John, please take a seat. I'd like to pose a question, two-part question. Is the need for change real? And if so, how do we, as the AIA, do it? And I'd say that's sort of the overarching question for us today. So what we're going to do as we have our conversations is we're going to ask a few questions as we did yesterday of them, and then we're going to open it to the floor for questions that you might have from your own perspective. So, one question that we're confronting, gentlemen, among ourselves, is the role of governance and what effect it has on an organization. And the key to that is boards. Now, that's not something we usually care that much about, but in our case, it matters a lot right now because we're looking at changing the board here at the national level, but also our components are looking at what they might do too. What do you think effective boards look like? And how do they make decisions? John, maybe you start off with that.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I think, from my perspective, I think effective boards have three components. The first is that they are strategic and not tactical. In other words, they understand that their job is to really guide the strategy and the direction of the organization, not so much in the short term, but looking longer term, 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and make sure that the organization is, the word I like to use is directionally correct. The second thing about boards, they need to be diverse. And when I talk about diversity, I don't not only mean ethnicity, but I also mean diversity of thought and perspective. So that you have the best people at the table, you have people at the table who can politely challenge each other, because when you have diversity of opinion, you get better decisions than when you have just a group of people who all think the same way, and you get groupthink out of that. And then the third function, which I commend you folks for doing, is moving to being a much smaller board so you can be nimble, so that the board is empowered and enabled to be strategic, to have diversity of thought, and be able to have enough time and the ability to really have a group of people who can have a discussion that's meaningful, impactful, and strategic. So being nimble, being diverse, and being strategic are the three elements that I would look at.
Oh, that's great, John. I'd like to just add to that, but I won't contradict that at all. I think that's right on. I think a good board has its eye on the prize as a group, which means that they're focusing on the benefit of the organization and its mission impact rather than their own locality or regional focus. And of course, the two have to be aligned, but when they're sitting on the board, they're thinking, what's best for the organization? What's going to help this organization achieve its mission? The other thing that a really healthy board needs is they need to have what I'd call professional collaboration, which means that they have the ability to work together as a team even though they don't see things necessarily eye to eye. When professionals collaborate, what you want is you want the complexity of the situation to be reflected in the contributions of the members. So if someone says, I see it this way and you see it that way, what you want is another dimension to emerge rather than a fight to break out. You want people to really appreciate the complexity of the issues and then be able to move forward for the betterment of the organization.
Two excellent answers, and many of those have been voiced throughout the course of this, but piecemeal as different people were approaching this issue. But this raises the question for us, and I think this is an excellent lead-in. Why do we need to do this? In other words, what trends are impacting associations for the next 5 years, 10 years? Why do we need to be nimble? I mean, that word is out there. What faces us? Either.
Well, I do at least half of my work in the private sector. And in the private sector, you don't have anybody talking about what's going to happen in 10 years. You have very few people talking about what's going to happen in 5 years. I mean, there are some things, obviously, that are going to stay the same. But what's happening in order for organizations to survive, to thrive, to be profitable, or in this case, to achieve mission impact, the horizon is shrinking dramatically. You need to be able to be responsive. Things, as we know, can change very fast. There was a paper that was released by, I think it was Deloitte, about a long time ago now, maybe about 8 years ago, on the topple rate of large legacy organizations, that they're coming down extremely fast, and that young organizations are going to replace them extremely fast. Now, it doesn't happen everywhere, but it can happen in your sector. I mean, it can happen in many places. So there needs to be a willingness to shrink the horizon, and that speaks to this nimbleness that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, I think the huge driver of change is technology. And around technology, to be specific, it's not social media per se, that's just another way of communicating. It's really all about mobile technology. And mobile technology, to me, is analogous to the advent of the personal computer 30 years ago, because mobile technology totally changes the membership equation. So if you think about an organization, think about AIA, most organizations are in the business of creating an experience for their members. Whether it's a breakfast like this, or whether it's a meeting you're having somewhere in June, or whether it's a publication you have, whatever it is, you're creating that experience for that member. What mobile technology does is enables the individual to create their own experience with you. And in order for you to identify and be able to adapt in that environment, you have to have content management strategies that allow you to aggregate, curate, and distribute on multiple platforms all the content you have, and you need to do that in a way that is responsive on a smartphone, responsive on a tablet, responsive on a desktop, responsive on multiple tools. And for most associations, the ability to aggregate, curate, and distribute that content and tag it and have a taxonomy that is efficient and effective is a huge issue. And unless you solve that issue, your value proposition for membership is going to go down dramatically. The second area, which is really not even tied to mobile technology except tangentially from the standpoint of a younger demographic, is demographics. And when we look at demographics, we're really talking about a couple of features here. One is the number of generations that are in the workforce. Now 3-4 generations are in the workforce, which all coming into that with a different mindset. That's one issue. Second issue is ethnicity. White population is pretty much flatlined. Black population pretty much flatlined. Huge increases in the Hispanic and the Asian populations. And so over the next 20 years, you're going to see dramatic increases there. 1 in 7 Americans is Hispanic today. In the next 40 years, it'll be 1 in 3. And so when you start looking at that, that's a huge issue. And then the third issue is age. So the baby boomer cohort, which is the one that is now in the workforce and gradually moving out, is a very large cohort. The cohort that's coming in behind that is a cohort that's about half that size. So you think about it, birth rate was highest in 1957, lowest in 1977. So you're going to have a real workforce challenge issue for most professions because there's just not going to be that many people there. That's assuming all your public education and educational opportunities are equal to what they were 10 years ago or today. If there's any deterioration there, it's going to be even more difficult to get competent people in the workforce. So I think demographics, mobile technology are huge issues for most associations.
You've got me, you've said some provocative things here, and in fact, we face disruptive technology. Some of it is beneficial, some is just riddled with change, and in fact, some of you know that I was out in California a couple of weeks ago, and I visited Mountain View, and I think I stared into the future, and it's going to demand many of the things that you have described, because it is a disruptive change to the way that we typically have done our business. But this question of demographics and this younger generation that is coming along and their own expectations, what are they looking for? What is their life, what are they looking for within their workplace? How do you think that is going to affect just our own offices and the expectations of the firms that they're going to go to?
Well, I see younger people, in some ways, there's a stream that is the same, which is that they're trying to find their place in the world. And I think every generation goes through that, and it's a mistake to think, to look at that and say, well, that's really radically different than where we were. So there's a thread that goes through this. It's just the human thread. Right. And it says, you know, these people are on a trail, this is their vocation. At some point, they're going to reach a stage in their life where they're going to say, it's really important for me to be around other people who are like me, to share knowledge and all that. So there's a gate that's going to bring them in the door of the organization. But then there are things that are significantly different, and they're a reflection of a different world that we live in. So being comfortable with technology, being comfortable with having many-to-many relationships instead of looking for a top-down structure where where you're given a mandate and you just have to execute. A desire to participate. One of the things that you see in new organizations today is the need to be in touch with the customer at every level of the organization. Well, that's a reflection of a mindset, and young people have that mindset. So they don't want to sit in a cube and be told what it is that they need to do in order to please the customer. They want to be interfacing with the customer, and they want to be able to challenge authority. Collaboration has made a huge leap in the last 10 to 15 years, and they're looking to work with people, supervisors, with the people who are above them, who are comfortable fully engaging with them. I think these are some of the trends that you see.
I agree. I'm fond of saying that the new 18 is 26. And what I really mean by that is that people are making life choices later. Life choices like, you know, getting married, having children, and, oh, by the way, picking a career. And so that's occurring later in life. The second thing is that the generation that's coming up is really a programmed generation. They are used to having parents who are helicopter parents. They follow everything that they do. They are programmed to, if they go from A to B, they know they can go to C. And oh, by the way, everybody gets a trophy along the way. And so this is the generation that's coming in the workforce. And I think that as this generation goes forward, I agree with everything that Seth says, but I think we have to overlay that with what I call how we actually program the career going forward so that they feel like they are meaningful. Because one of the things that I think does differentiate this younger cohort is something that we call authenticity. They want to give back. They want they want the world to be a better place because of what they do. And I think you're seeing that with a lot of associations who are running projects as well as companies. Planet, profit, people, the 3 Ps. And they want to give back. They want to work in a place that is making the world a better place. And so I think that really transcends a lot of the things that we're talking about here from the standpoint that you need to create that environment and that space that they're going to be comfortable in.
So all of this change, this disruptive technology, a change in demographic and expectations in the workplace, what do associations do to prepare for this change? I mean, you're saying that they might go away as we understand them now. Tell us a little bit about that from your perspective. We need each other.
Well, I don't think they're going to go away.
Okay.
I mean, I think associations are about community and about knowledge sharing. And that's a fundamental trait, and it's becoming increasingly valuable to do it well. So I think what's going to happen is that associations have to understand how to evolve in the current environment. And I want to come back to the metaphor that John, when he talks about mobile technology, it's easy to just look at your phone and think, okay, so that means that I should be able to get my reports on this phone. But it's much more than that. And I'll just give an example. You know, I'm wearing one of these, I don't know what it's called, the Fitbit thing, right? And before I had the Fitbit, I was tracking my calories on MyFitnessPal. Well, MyFitnessPal measures your calories for, you know, when you go to the gym, I type in I was weightlifting or I was running or I was walking, and that's what this does. But these two devices work together, and they work together almost seamlessly. I mean, it took me less than 5 seconds to hook them up. Now, you'd think that they would be competitors, but they're not. They're augmenting each other through that synergy, and that's part of the mobile technology. It's looking at how the different apps work together. I was at the World Bank for 13 years and part of the knowledge management initiative there, and when we decided that we were going to focus on poverty alleviation, instead of getting loans through, which is the core business of a bank, but we're going to focus on poverty alleviation, we began to realize that most of the people we depended on were not our employees. So if you built a community of environmentalists or a community of educators or a community of highway specialists, the best in the world, you know, 2 members out of a 24-person community were bank employees. So if we really wanted to do highway development, we were going to have to figure out how to work deeply with those other 22 people, just like Fitbit and MyFitnessPal are working together deeply. So I think that's something that we're going to have to look at.
Yeah, I think understanding the environment is critical, and also understanding the changing business model. I mean, and mobile technology enables this. You know, the membership model as we know it today is an evolving model and is changing, and it's going to change rapidly. And the reason it's changing is because if you think about it, membership is a fixed price menu. You know, you get one price and you get 7 courses. Now, you may only want 1 course, but you're going to get 7. You paid for 7. So what mobile technology enables is the individual to say, I only want dessert, or I only want the appetizer, or I only want the main course. I don't want everything else. So I only want what I want when I want it on the device I want to receive it. And so associations have to understand that that is the environment in which they're operating and rapidly moving to if they're not in it already. And so what that means is you really need to anticipate what your constituency is going to want. And a lot of this has to do with how we price things. And so as I look at membership models going forward, I really now look at not only membership and members, but customers. In your world, you have architects who are members, and you have architects who aren't members. The architects who aren't members maybe aren't members and never will be, but they're willing to pay the retail price for something that you have. Somebody who is a member expects to get somewhat of a discount. Somebody who is a member and expects to get more of a discount may be willing to buy prepackaged activities. So think of it as let me give you a sports analogy here. So you can get season tickets to a baseball game, or you can go out every day and buy a one-off ticket to see if you can get into the game as inexpensively as possible. But if you want the same seat for a set number of games, you're willing to pay up front to get that. Members are also willing to do that if you package your offerings, products, and services in a way that is attractive to them. So I really think the whole business model of, you know, this set price and then you get these things whether you want them or not is not the model that people want. And I always say this, and you can see it at Starbucks. People will pay for what they value. People will pay for what they value. And, you know, you can buy a 50-cent cup of coffee or you can buy a $3.50 cup of coffee. Why? Because you value that experience over something else. And so the same thing is true of organizations. People will still join organizations, but they're going to be joining and have an expectation that is dramatically different than it is today.
So according to your arguments, value for our members, and this is how they choose to join, is there value for me, resides in the future in choice. This is really sort of a core message here. And also in synergy. That is, can you bring the parts together and make them, serve them up so that they work for the member? What are the elements that you see as value for members and associations right now? What are people looking for? How do we define value? How do other associations define value?
I think at the end of the day, associations have 2 things. They have their name and they have content. And by and large, content is free. if you work hard enough at it. So the value proposition for any association, and this is more true of professional societies like AIA than it is of trade associations, because trade associations also have a huge advocacy agenda, which most professional societies, their agenda is not that large. Their appetite for advocacy is not as large as it is in a trade association. But in professional societies, you have content, and that's what you really have, and that's what I was saying earlier, enabled by mobile technology. The ability to aggregate that content from multiple places, not only the content that you create as an organization, but the content that members create independent of you, and the content that third parties create. To be able to aggregate that, curate it, tag it, and distribute it on multiple platforms so that people can get what they want and only what they want is the trick, and that's the value. So I use the example that maybe what they're valuing is the efficiency and the speed with which they can get it. You may have, they may be able to get whatever you have if they spend enough time at it free, if they work hard enough at it. But what you can do is provide it in a way, instead of taking 2 hours to get something, they can get something in 15 minutes. That's the value. It's the efficiency and the productivity that you're providing. But in order to do that, you have to have content management systems that allow you to be flexible, nimble, and efficient at doing all those things.
I'd like to build on that too. One of the things that I heard John say that really resonates for me is this jump from what I'd call content to the power to convene in context. Now you do, as he said, in professional societies, you often do need content. Content can be extremely valuable. But one of the trends that we see in the world at large is organizations moving from, let me tell you how to do it, simply because it's so complex and no one person, no one source knows how to do it. You have to do the kind of aggregation he's describing. But that, 20, 30 years ago, that's how associations worked. They were the one-stop shop for all the knowledge in a particular field. Well, so that's diffused now. There's some knowledge coming out of associations, but you have to pull it in from these other resources as well. But what an association can do is that it can use its name. There's only one AIA. When AIA convenes, it has a power to bring in people from not just AIA members, but anybody who takes this domain seriously, recognizes that name and says, if this event is branded under the AIA, then that means that there's going to be a certain level of quality. I can depend on a type of focus. I'm going to attend simply because it's the AIA that's convening. And then the other thing is the ability to set the context, which means that when you convene, you ask the right questions. And we all know that because when you look at a program before you decide to travel to another city, you ask yourself, are these the questions that are most pressing for me? And if the answer is no, you don't buy your ticket. But if the answer is yes, you show up because you want to be in, you want to see what's happening, you want to use that knowledge to your advantage.
That's the value piece.
Right. So moving from content to the power to convene and set the context.
It also, part of what you're describing, though, really comes down to what this brand means. And part of our repositioning is to heighten the value and relevance of architects and the AIA. And we're doing that through three primary areas. One is communication, one is advocacy in a variety of forms, advocating within communities, not just on the Hill, and third is building up the body of knowledge. So it sounds as if that part of our discussion, at least our future that we've described for ourselves, is in the wheelhouse, but we have tremendous homework to do on the, let's say, on the digital and information delivery. Although we can heighten the brand, that is something that we can explicitly do and are already on the path of. But does this change involve on the part of associations tremendous investment in information technologies? Does it involve a refocusing of their efforts? What will make an association effective to be able to do this work that you're describing?
Well, the short answer is yes.
It always is. Yeah.
Yes, and ASAE is doing it now ourselves, so I'm living this in real time. So I think that you need to invest in a number of different things. You need to invest in content management systems, knowledge. I use content and knowledge synonymously, so
Sure.
content and knowledge systems. You need to invest and understand taxonomy so that you can easily and automatically tag information depending on what your competencies are in any organization, so that it can be easily cataloged over here, and when somebody wants something, the relevant information comes up. And you need to have knowledgeable people who understand the business or the profession to be able to organize and understand and think intuitively about what a user is going to want. It's really being able to anticipate what people are going to want from you. You know, successful organizations not only provide things that people want now because they know they want them, but they also anticipate what people are going to want down the road and invest in making sure that they are first to have it, so that you have what they want before they know they want it.
Okay.
And that is the real trick in this day and age.
Predictive power.
It's predictive power. Yeah, that's right. And you know, there are many software programs out there that allow you to predict behaviors, because what you're really doing is not only tracking what people buy, but you're tracking what people do, because that's important. People may say I'm interested in X, Y, or Z, but what they really do is A, B, and C. And so you need to figure out, you know, not only what they say they want, but what they actually do, and then predict beyond that what they're going to want. And to me, that's the trick.
Okay.
So I think this, I agree with John, and I also think that data is something, it has turned into something that has never been before. The power of it is really remarkable. Right. But what I would focus on also is the mindset and the human component. So, I mean, I don't know, you know, I can at least look at the gentleman up here on the stage, and I know if we looked at our communications bill over the last 30 years, 35 years, how much did we pay the phone company 35 years ago? And I'm talking about in our home, not in our business. Yeah. And how much do we pay them today? It's a multiple, right? And so we've all gotten used to this idea that we're going to be in technology. We're going to invest in communications. We're going to make sure that we have you know, the smartphone so that we can take advantage, so that we can be part of the future that's going on. That's a mindset. And we also know that as soon as you buy your iPad or your iPhone, it's out of date. As soon as you install your software, I mean, if it takes you more than 30 seconds, and it always does, you know, so there's got to be this willingness to participate in a moving stream and know that there's always going to be something that's newer, better, flashier, does more as soon as you invest in something. That said, what drives this whole thing is the community. And it's the esprit de corps that's in the room. All of this technology is designed to serve a population, and the population has to have that willingness, that force of power, that sense of cohesiveness to say, I want to be part of something bigger, and that's what drives the investment. When again, I'll go back to my World Bank experience. The first project I had in the Knowledge Management Initiative was an example of build it and they won't come. And we spent, you know, a lot of money creating a system that did not serve our people, and it was mostly empty. And then when we focused on the human component, and I'm talking about professionalism, I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, going out for drinks, I'm talking about bringing people together to work on real world problems. When that became the driving force, then the technology was the infrastructure underneath it that allowed us to achieve our mission, and the two work synergistically. So that human component is critical.
Well, speaking of humans, there are a few of them sitting out in this room. So why don't we pass a mic, and whoever would like to ask a question, we'll take them from mics. The choices are the mics themselves, and also you can use your mobile devices. We're at least going to allow that, to text your questions to AIAGR 66746. So you can do it either way, and we'd love to hear from you. Ask directly. Anybody out here got a question that they'd like? Well, there's this one. We got a couple of folks out there.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Adrienne Monterre. I'm the Executive Director of ASAE South Carolina. I'm also a member. As a three-tier organization, which, you know, I think is somewhat unusual, how do we identify unique opportunities to serve our members at each of those three levels?
If I understood the question, it's how does a three-tiered organization?
Three-tiered, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I might have some interesting perspectives on that you may or may not want to hear. I think that...
Get real. Tell us what you think.
I think that I use the term efficiency, and I'll use the term mission. And so organizations need to ask themselves the question, if I were creating it today, if I were creating the brand AIA today, would I create it the way it's currently organized? You need to ask yourself that question first, based on who you are today. Because who you were maybe 100 years ago is different the technology you have today and the things and everything you have around you today that you didn't have 100 years ago, including transportation, communication, technology, is different. So would you create it the same way? The answer may be yes, but for many organizations, the answer is no. And I think that, and the reason for that is because it really has to do with efficiency and productivity. In two-tiered, three-tiered systems, there's a lot of inefficiencies and redundancies. And in those models, sometimes you need to have those three tiers to deliver the product or service. But you have to ask yourself the honest question, could this product or service be delivered more efficiently and more effectively through a different model? That doesn't mean it's just a national office someplace, but it also doesn't mean that there are three levels. Now, in your case, you have to answer the question yourself. I'll give you the example of my own experience with the American Diabetes Association. 18 years ago, well, for 15 years, I worked for ADA for 25 years. I was the CEO for 15. You know, about 18 years ago, and I've been with ASAE now for 10, but about 18 years ago, ADA, American Diabetes Association, asked themselves the same question. In those days, we had the national office and 50 state affiliates. And we asked the question, would we create it like we did? In those days, 50 years ago. Now ADA is almost 75 years old. So, and the answer was really, after we really struggled with it for a year, the answer was no. And what we did over the course of a year's period of time was communicate with each of our local chapters, and we collapsed all the local chapters into the national organization, where we formed one board, one budget, one staff, and one strategy. And in that process, we were able to provide 25% more dollars to the mission of the organization, which was research and awareness, because that was what was important to the American Diabetes Association at that time, and still is. But at that time, that was important because the organization had evolved. Years ago, diabetes education was provided in church basements and schools. Then diabetes education became a profession, and the need for ADA to do that no longer existed. But what did exist was the epidemic of diabetes and the need for awareness and research. And so it's really understanding who you are, what you want to do, what you want to deliver, and what's the most efficient way to deliver it.
Here's another question that's come up, a text question. How do you balance investing in future content infrastructure and the role of disruptive technologies in undermining it?
Go ahead, Seth.
How about you, Seth?
Well, you know, it's a tightrope. You're constantly on it. That's the reality of it. You have to draw a line in the sand at some point or you never get anything done. So you do the best you can. You know, there was a time when, I remember when buying PCs, when you bought the biggest, most powerful PC you possibly could because you anticipated that you'd hold on to it longer, right? But then what started happening is that new functionality started emerging. And if you had something that you were going to keep around the house for 7 years, you were behind the curve. So you really had to change the frame that you were using. I think you really have to look at 3 horizons. You have to be able to balance 3 horizons. You have your current need. You have something that you have to take care of today. You have what I'd call the short-term horizon, which is the budget cycle. So we have the next foreseeable future, the 2 or 3 years in front of us. How are we going to achieve that? And then you have the weak signals that are coming on the far horizon, you know, which you obviously don't want to organize yourself around because who knows what's going to emerge. On the other hand, you don't want to act in a blind way and do something that's silly by pushing yourself in a completely different direction than the rest of the planet is going. So you need to be able to balance those 3 worlds when you make your choices.
I see somebody standing at the back. I can't quite see who it is. Oh, maybe it's Zurich.
Yep. Hi, everyone. Zurich Esposito with AIA Chicago. I'm wondering if you can comment on how dues are generally trending for associations, either large or small, and are you seeing new non-dues revenue models emerging lately?
What was the question?
He's saying new.
How are dues trending?
How are dues trending? Yeah.
Well, we both can answer the question because you've done some research on it. But you know, if you look at professional societies and trade associations, the trends are a little bit different, but both are trending downward. You know, the average professional society now has about 25% of their budget as dues. Average trade associations, about 45% is dues. The rest is non-dues revenue. And I would say that as you heard me mention earlier, as we move to really a pricing structure, a cafeteria model that enables people to purchase only what they want, I would suggest that you could call that dues or not, but I would suggest that model is going to change. And I think that non-dues revenue will continue to increase, and dues will continue to be less and less a feature as a percentage of the budget. Simply because, as we said earlier, technology enables that. So non-dues revenue is something that organizations need to think through. Now, the good thing about non-dues revenue is that it can add a lot of value to an organization. You have to be careful that you do things in the non-dues revenue area that is realistic. So, for example, AIA may decide that, you know, they should be in the tire business. Well, you know, maybe you can sell tires and make money on it, but if it has nothing to do with who you are or what you're about, I would suggest that not be the business you get in. But you might be able to look for other business models where there's a value that you can provide to architects that you're not providing now, that could be done either through a for-profit business model or through the organization itself in a not-for-profit model. So, but I think the short answer is, you know, as a percentage of dues to non-dues revenue, the percentage of dues revenue is shrinking.
And I'll just add on to that. I think the second part of the question, if I heard you correctly, was are new non-dues revenue business models emerging? And the answer is definitely yes. And it comes back to a point John made just a moment ago when he said, ask yourself the question, if I were going to create this organization today, would I create it the way it is? Well, you can look to the private sector. In the private sector, in the last 2 or 3 years, membership is being used as a value generation tool. And we all know many of the organizations, they're household names at this point, that have really leveraged that, but it's happening everywhere. I mean, it's happening from Zipcar to Netflix. I'm going to be convening a couple of workshops in the spring on private sector business models and bringing someone in from Silicon Valley to look at that. And I think what associations need to do is they need to study what's happening in the private sector and ask the question, how do we transpose this to a mission-focused organization? Because these people are responding in real time. It's a time when entrepreneurs are very lucky and organizations have a hard time. Because if you're building something from scratch, you can cobble it together quickly using very inexpensive tools and get the job done with far-reaching impact. But if you have an organizational structure, retooling it itself takes time, as you know, as you've been going through that process. So yes, there are new models emerging, and there's a lot to learn from the private sector as well as other associations. I know in my interviews with association executives, I get like one gem from each of them. And I think one of the things that we can be doing is pulling these gems together and sharing them with each other. And I'll just add on the tail end of that is that one of the wonderful things about associations is their willingness to share. So there's a lot of cross-pollination available.
Great. I think we've got a question over here.
Hi, Julie Taylor. I'm the public director on the national board. What are the red flags that would indicate change for change's sake as opposed to change to solve systemic problems?
Just repeat the question. What are the red flags that make change?
That would indicate change for change's sake, as opposed to change that would solve systemic problems in an organization.
Let me take a shot at that. I think the best time for organizations to change is when they're on top. And some people will say that's change for change's sake. I would say that's anticipating the fact that once you're on top, there's only 2 ways to go. One is that way and one is that way. And so to me, that's not change for change's sake. That's saying we're on top now, and if we want to be even better, we need to change the way we're operating because we're getting probably as much as we can get out of what we're doing right now. And so we need to be doing something different, either smarter, better, or more efficiently than we are. And so I think organizations that change just because they say they want to change, that to me, that's silly. I think organizations that change when they're on top, then that's the right thing to do. Organizations that change because they're forced to, they're already too late in many cases. And so I applaud the organization. I know you went through some tough times with the recession as an industry and a profession, because of what you do. And the organization would, as a result of that, suffer a little bit as well. I know you've come back strong into that, and I would suggest that you're at a good time, and now is a good time when you're getting stronger and stronger to really look at who you are and what you're doing and take it up to the next level.
Well said.
Great. Here's a question about technology. Technology and better websites are expensive. For smaller sized chapters, how do you propose putting all of this into play with volunteers and part-time staff? And of course, obviously, many of our services are delivered at the local level. So that's a prime question for this audience.
Well, there's a tremendous amount that's out there that's not expensive. That's what I would say. You need to look at what are the requirements that you need to meet. You can look to headquarters. You can look to some of your peers to get assistance in some of those areas where you may even have templates, things that you can install. You may have volunteers who have experts. I mean, I see just a tremendous amount out there that can be put together with very little budget. You know, I mean, it's like running a small business. I mean, you have to do what you can. I do think that it's a place to invest. But I don't think it's a place where you're necessarily constrained.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea how you organize your technology with the 3 levels that you have, whether it's one system and everybody plugs and plays, or whether it's multiple systems depending on where you are and how much money you have.
Multiple.
Huh?
Multiple.
Multiple.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll get back to what I said earlier. To me, that's an inefficient system. What you ought to be doing is creating a system that allows people to plug and play locally as they need to. Keeping in mind what I said, and that is technology enables so much. And, you know, I always tell people that, you know, people don't own a drill because they want to own a drill. They own a drill because they want a hole. And people don't come to your website because it happens to be in, you know, Chicago, Illinois, or San Francisco, California. They come to your website because they want a hole and they need a tool to make a hole. And so you need to organize yourselves and think through that mindset. How can I most efficiently and effectively give a local architect what they need, when they want it, in the format they want to receive it? And that's really it's really a simple question. But the details are tough, but it's a simple question. And when you ask yourself that question and you answer it honestly, you then get some sense of how you can move in that direction. But having systems at multiple levels that are all unique and different and don't speak to each other is not a very efficient system.
I might ask, well, we've got a text question. Let's see. There's a cost of operations to revenue ratio that we should not exceed. Is there a cost?
Well, absolutely. You don't want your cost of operations to exceed your revenue. I don't know.
I'm not sure I'm not sure I understand that question, except obviously you don't want to operate in the red unless you're making investments in the organization. But I think that you know, there are, you know, ASAE produces an operating ratios report that gives you the operating ratios for things from salaries to occupancy to technology, you know, just about anything you can imagine. So there is information available that you can get to tell you what various operating ratios are. But at the end of the day, most, you know, associations are nonprofit organizations. They're around because they have a mission, and the mission is not necessarily to make money, other than to make sure that the organization is financially sound and can weather a storm that comes up periodically. So, you know, I think you want to be spending as much as you can and plowing it back into member value, because that's what good organizations do.
Let me ask this as a final question. We're embarked on change. This repositioning is major change for us in a variety of ways. Everything from that governance question that lies in front of us to our systems, our information technology, our brand, our organization itself. This is a major moment for us. Do you have analogies from other associations who have gone through change? Obviously, nobody's us, but others that have effectively moved into the 21st century, addressed the questions that lie in front of them, and if so, who are they and what have they done?
There's a lot of organizations that are going through it effectively. I think that I'll come back again to something that John said about being on top and the mindset of continuous improvement. We live in an age of continuous change. That's the reality. We are no longer in episodic change. That was 30 years ago. Episodic change is where you do something, you stabilize, and you just hum for a while. We don't do that anymore. So you can expect more of the same. And I know people will go, oh my God, what does that mean? Does that mean that we're not going to have any stability? It means that you have to learn to surf. That's the way of the 21st century. That's what's going on here. And the organizations that are doing really well have leaders who are bold, who are savvy about risk, who see the value. They do that preemptive. They try and discern those weak signals and get ahead of them so that they can provide people with stuff that makes them go, wow, this is cool, I want to be part of this. And all of that requires a mindset that says, hey, I am in the future. I am part of it. I'm leaning as far over the prow as I can. The organizations where I see that kind of thing happening, you have someone at the helm who does that. I think of Barbara Bird-Keenan and the work that she just did at the Institute of Food Technologists. She's now at the Endocrine Society. She did some amazing things there. Transformed governance, created partnerships with multilateral aid organizations around the world, got involved in conversations not just about food, but about food, water, and energy, and feeding the 9 billion in 2050. I think of Chris McEntee and the work that she's doing at the American Geophysical Union with the Thriving Earth Exchange. I mean, there's a number of organizations out there that are just leaning way out, trying to see as far as they can, and they have a good leader at the helm.
Yeah, we could talk, mention organizations all day long that are doing that, but let me answer the question in a little bit different way. I think, in some of the things that you're doing here, so I think what we're seeing is a trend in terms of how people are getting to what Seth said they can do. And achieve. And one of those things is, as we said earlier, having your governance structure be nimble, having it be smaller, quick decision making, organized in a way, and we see a lot of organizations doing that. We see a lot of organizations looking at traditional committee structures and doing away with them. They create task forces as they need them. When the task force has completed its work, they go away. And that doesn't mean you didn't necessarily have less volunteers involved. It just means that you don't have people involved in what a lot of times becomes in organizations and associations, and I've been doing this now for over 40 years. If we're really honest with ourselves, a lot of committees are busy work. And it's hard, it takes staff resources and it takes volunteer resources. And it's the reason we have that committee is because we've always had that committee. And if you ask the committee what they're really doing, it's hard to pinpoint. So a lot of people are really moving away from that and kind of blowing that model up and saying, we're going to form volunteer groups and really, it doesn't matter what you call them, but you're going to form volunteer groups that are doing work. The other thing that organizations are doing are really investing in communities. Where you're organized, and I don't know if you are or not in AIA, but where you're organized around the various disciplines within a profession.
We do.
And so you form communities, but you spend time building those communities. Social media and technology enable you to really have very robust conversations, and you can really create Facebook-like communities among architects, and maybe you're doing that, but invest in that because that really brings value. That's the glue that holds people to the organization. When you talk about something like, why do people buy Amazon Prime? That's the glue. Now, the glue might be free shipping, but nonetheless, your glue is going to be something different, but it's going to be about community. And so I think that I really encourage you to take a look at the organization as you've done and should continue to do, to look at it and say, these are the things we've done. We've always done them this way. Should we continue to do them this way? Because this is who we are. This is what we want to do. This is the value we want to deliver to our members.
Value to our members. That's a good final note. Thank you both, gentlemen, so much. And appreciate your time and your insights into associations. And I know that this has raised questions on so many parts here in the room, and I think it'll provoke some good conversations in your own discussions and as you get together. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here.
The American Institute of Architects, designing a better world.